That's slander. That's slanderous.
It made me think about pre-stressed reinforced concrete beams.
Fingers crossed.
Hello and welcome to Yarn Library Podcast with me, Adam Cleveley, next to a building site where we're dealing with a massive internet delay because I can't be next to Georgia this week.
So yes, we are not in person with each other. I'm still in Cambridge. Adam is not.
I'm not.
Because, no, when we started this podcast, or rather Adam asked me, hey, do you want to do a podcast with me? What was it, like 7-8 weeks ago now? 6 weeks? I don't know. How many episodes are we in? Because there were some weeks we did 2, so I've lost track.
I didn't really have time to change all our travel plans, all the rest of it anyway, so I can't be in Cambridge today. So we're recording remotely and testing out our notoriously reliable software.
We did do some tests when you were still in Cambridge, but we didn't know how your internet was going to be when you got there. The test was good, though, because we found out that actually my home internet is basically scammy, really, at this point. It was like 3 megabits per second or something, which is not great in the modern world. So I have come into the office, to the lab, where I'm in my group office, but hopefully most of my sort of fellow PhD students are not in at the moment or have already gone home for Christmas, or it's that kind of lag at the end of term when no one's really in. There is, however, a group talk over the corridor, and I've done my best to try and soundproof as much as possible, but at some point you might hear some clapping at the end of a talk. There is a big sign on the door, though, so fingers crossed. The other hand, I can't really see Adam very well, or I can, but he's sort of like he's a blob. I can hear him, but I can't see him very well. So you might just get my pretty face and this pretty jumper. But yeah, so now Adam isn't there at all. Whoopsie. Yay! Not great. Not great. Maybe he was trying to change the settings. I don't know. Maybe that was a bad idea. Oh, he's joining. He's coming from somewhere else. There's 2 of them. There's 2 Adam Cleveleys. No. Yay. He did suggest that it could be an audio-only week, which would be disappointing, I know, for our YouTube video viewers, but I should check my messages. What's the goss? Well, didn't expect to become a solo podcaster this quickly. Who knew that you needed to send your co-host out of the realm? It's very Machiavellian. Hi. You're back.
I'm back. My God, I don't know what's happened.
Did you just did you refresh something? Please tell me that you did something.
No, my connection just failed. It's our worst nightmare.
Well, I just practiced being a solo podcaster for the first time.
You did such a wonderful job, Georgia.
Thank you. I don't know if you could hear me.
I could hear you to start with for a while, and then it froze, and then I lost all contact.
I'd also managed to stop my own backup recording as well, it turns out. We're off to a great start. You might get something this week. Beggars can't be choosers, and you're all begging for us. So, yeah, I'll maybe take that as a bit. I'm not that self-confident. I never make comments like that. Who am I? I don't know. God, it's all going to my head, Adam. It's all going to my head.
Georgia.
I finished this jumper. I'm feeling myself. Sorry, did I mention my jumper again?
It is a fantastic. We're going to have to, because that was in the part of the recording where, even pre-recording, I was fully admiring that because I absolutely love sleeves or cuffs of sleeves that don't match, and it's something I love to do, and you've done it beautifully there. And you can't see that there's also a beautiful hem around the bottom as well, in an extra colour as well. It's magnificent. Beautiful top.
Thank you. It was a lot of stash stuff, like a lot of mixing bits and bobs up, which was really nice. Everything is 3 strands of different things. There's some alpaca everywhere, I think. Yeah, I love it. It's my favourite thing.
Not to be too bougie or anything.
I know. I remember when I was about 18 and I first had like a composition lesson when I was about to start my degree. And I remember asking someone, am I allowed to like my own music? Is that the point? And this professor guy was like, yes, that's the point. Well, until that time, I just thought, oh, no. You just have to sort of make it. And then, it would be too self-confident or too self-righteous or boastful to like the things that you make. But I bloody love this vest. It's wonderful. So
it is
and
wonderful.
So cozy.
Well done, Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, it's rare that I actually finish a project. So here we are. Alas, because we've done that start to the episode, I don't actually know what's there. But yes, we're not in the right places that we are normally, just in case we haven't got that before.
In case you're not clear, we're not sat in the same room with somewhat different lighting and backdrops.
Yeah, I'm in my office. I've got super fast internet, and I wish I could share some of it with Adam, who is, I don't know what you're running on, mate.
Carrier pigeons at this point, I think.
Carrier pigeons. I love carrier pigeons. Like the whole concept of a carrier pigeon is great. Anyway, right. Game of Wool.
Game of Wool.
For now, at least, we are the Yarn Library podcast and we are reacting to Game of Wool. I am pleased to report that Adam has indeed seen the episode. I am sad to report, on the other hand, that he managed to watch it before me because for the first time I decided I would watch it on catch up and he inadvertently ended up giving spoilers. And so, yeah, that was unfortunate.
I mean, well, I think it's fair enough that I assumed that you would watch it when it went out live, given that we have a recording like the next day.
I know. I think it's because we're recording in the afternoon today, which we don't normally do. And then last night, to be honest, I was putting up curtains and it was getting like close to us not really having curtains past 9 p.m. Well, Dima suggested, do you want to watch it on catch up whilst we're sort of holding up these curtains? And yeah, I did. And I mean, it's my fault for not telling you. Yeah.
Well, I'm
only
sorry.
Got myself to blame.
In voice notes in the future, I will say spoiler alert.
Do you know the funny thing is, I thought that you might deliver spoilers. So actually, I did have preventative measures here. I thought there could be spoilers, and so I asked Dima to listen to the message on my behalf, just in case there were any spoilers. And then he came to me and said, yes, no, he did drop a spoiler, but don't worry. And then he used the person's pronouns. So whoever thinks that pronouns aren't important, yeah, that wasn't
amazing.
Great.
There
anyway.
we go. Well, can we get on with the spoilers now? This is full of spoilers. That's the whole point of the show.
Full of spoilers.
Right.
That's the whole point. Right, now on to more joyous things.
The episode of the Game of Wool. How did you find it, Georgia?
So, challenge switcheroo. For people who haven't watched it or aren't able to watch it, we've all been expecting, based on previous weeks, the whole competition, that you have the solo challenge and then the group challenge. And kind of unannounced. I don't know if I just like hallucinated and didn't get their warning about this. I mean, it's not in the grand scheme of things. It's like it's a small problem, but it was a different flow. And I think even just the brief mention of like, oh yeah, we're actually going to do the group challenge first. It did make me think, okay, has something gone on in editing, like where it's really obvious after the first challenge. So it was very, very weird.
Apparently they filmed them that way round every single week. So they have been filming them where they've done the group challenge first and then the solo. But for the edit for the first few episodes, they've shown them the other way round. I presume because the group task made it maybe too obvious who was going to go.
I remember hearing that earlier in the season with Meadow, but I didn't know if it was consistent. And in a way, I kind of preferred that. It was like big picture and then small picture. Like people had to save themselves with their individual efforts. And I did actually enjoy that pacing. It was just a sort of a weird shift and change where I think in other whittled down shows, you kind of get a bit more, you get used to the feelings and the progress and the pacing of how things unfold. Maybe they were just experimenting, seeing how the episode settled.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think that this task as well, the individual knitting challenge, made it very obvious who was going to leave. And I don't think it would have worked the other way around. Like you would have been sitting through the group challenge thinking, however they wanted to show it and film it. But anyway, the team challenge was an interesting one. Each team was given 2 Aran jumpers, which they had to make something for the catwalk from. So this was all about recycling or upcycling. It was an interesting reimagining of the Aran jumper. I think I would have utterly failed at this. I have absolutely no sewing skills. I hate sewing. My version of knitting for myself is that I hate sewing so much, I will go to extreme lengths not to sew. I think I've sewn about 2 seams in my knitting life. I pick up and I keep knitting. Just everything I construct is constructed in a way where I don't have to sew. So this one had Adam will fail here written all over it.
Wow. I mean, you've mentioned your love of Kitchener stitch before. Do you not class Kitchener stitch? I know it's not sewing, but like I think I associate it with a kind of sewing, because when you're doing Kitchener stitch, you'll have a thread of yarn and it will be on a tapestry needle. It's like a sewing needle, but it's got a bigger end so you can get more stuff through it. And then you have to do a certain combination of stitches, but it's all through loops, so you're not actually ever piercing into the fabric.
No, I wouldn't. I guess you're right. I wouldn't class that as sewing, though. That doesn't feel like sewing to me, because you've got live loops at that point, which you need to fix. That's still, I don't know. In my head, I rationalise it. I'm not saying it's rational. I've rationalised that so that it's that's not sewing. The group challenge was that they had to create these garments, which were pretty significant. It wasn't just any garment, sorry. It had to be a dress. Again, that's another place where I would feel completely out of place, because I've never made anything like a dress. That would completely throw me.
You talk about it being stressful. When they were first delivering like the specs of the challenge, because of course the team challenge is effectively blind, like the knitters don't know what they're going in for and the judges don't know whose is whose. Isaac looked stressed. Like it looked like he didn't connect with the challenge.
That's exactly where I would have been. Like rabbit in the headlights. Like I'd just be completely lost. But luckily, I mean, he was with Elsa, and she had some great ideas.
Yes, and that was interesting to see, actually. So we had two teams. We had Elsa and Isaac, and then we had Lydia and Holger. And straight away, it was going to be interesting to see in such small quarters, when you've only got 4 people left, 2 teams, 2 pairs, how they approach designing. And it kind of reminded me a little bit, in the past we've talked about group challenges and my own experiences of having to do group work when I was like in school, and, let's go work in pairs. When you've got to make a project like that collaboratively, sometimes it can be really tricky, especially when you're also trying to fight for your own recognition or to display your own skills. And we saw both groups kind of approach it in different ways, I think. So in Isaac and Ailsa's group, it was kind of like they sort of contributed 2 separate ideas that then they merged together, where, I think Isaac said, we could do like a halter neck, like cut out the sleeves and then do like an I-cord edge. And then he unwound some yarn from a different shirt and knitted up a sort of like a turtleneck, a roll neck kind of collar. And then Ailsa had this idea of, I think she said Tinkerbell, but like she wanted this kind of flared bottom, like a skirt that sort of came out in layers and draping. And there were some various changes through the challenge in kind of different ways that they approached it. But they kind of did a weird thing with the editing where we didn't really see the full look until it went in front of the catwalk, which I kind of enjoyed. I feel like in previous episodes, we didn't get that anticipation. So I didn't actually know how it was going to look. And then when they did do the reveal, it was actually like, I was surprised, because I think there was a big contrast between the 2 groups and how they worked. And Holger he was like looking over at the other group and going like, why is he doing that? Is it that? And we did see Holger and Lydia's quite clearly. If we'd have seen both of them all the way through the challenges, it might have been clearer.
It was sort of frustrating that you couldn't see the whole garment as they were making it. And I think, that was better editing, I suppose, from that point of view, that it made the show a little bit more exciting. As someone said to me, this was a challenge that was tailor-made for Holger because he's trained as a tailor. There's an enormous amount of experience there which he could contribute. The other thing that I saw Holger do was that he was coaching the model on how to walk and how he wanted her to show off the garment as she went down the catwalk. Yeah, exactly. And I just think, again, maybe that's Holger's experience, but he knew how he wanted the garment to be shown. He wasn't just thinking about the garment itself. He was thinking about the exhibition of the garment.
And that speaks to his experience, knowing that, oh, yes, I'm allowed to do this. Not even allowed to, but just sometimes when you've had the experience of something like working with a model, you know that that's even a conversation that you can have. And if you don't know that that's a conversation you can have, you might not have it. It's not necessarily that someone doesn't have the confidence to do it. It's just doesn't even occur to you. And last week we talked a little bit about Holger's professional experience and what he brought to the show, and also Lydia's as well, because, you know, this is the first time I think in the show that we've had a mention of her yarn business, which was really nice to hear, because there's been a lot made of the fact that Holger is a tailor and has that experience as on Savile Row, but we didn't really hear that from Lydia's perspective. But, you know, they both bring professional experience in different ways to the challenge and to the show in general. Also, Lydia had a few moments in the editing where she was talking about how, yes, Holger is a faster sewer than me, but I'm definitely a faster knitter. And she was very much in her power over that and very much asserting her contribution. And I really liked that, because I think also there was something in the actual design and the planning of the challenge where, yes, it could also be that Holger was being a little bit too, he wasn't necessarily being, you pick this idea and you pick that idea and let's combine them together. He was very much like, this is the design concept, clarity of design. And she was happy to kind of go along with that and bring her skills in a different way to realize something, because she recognized this is Holger's strength. Like, he knows sewing and construction and dress construction much better than I do. And I will be able to contribute in a different way. And I feel like that is a really good way of team working. Some people could say, oh no, it's not team working because you're not both contributing an idea, but I think that's a bit simplistic. I mean, you work with lots of teams all the time, and I really feel like if you can figure out a way of team working where you actually individually bring your skills to something, that's a good fit.
Oh, I've just hit my microphone, sorry. But from my point of view, the most fun teams to work in are where you find a group of people that are exactly like you, that have all the same personalities and characteristics, and they're just absolutely wonderful fun. You'll find that those teams will spend social time outside of work together or outside of whenever they're supposed to be working together. That's the most fun. The work they produce is absolute compared to a team which is really limited. You have the best functioning teams are where you can stretch that dynamic as far as possible and have the most difference possible within a team. You want teams across every kind of experience or gender or nationality, every kind of difference you can bring into a team. You make it stronger. It makes it harder to work with because everyone's got a different opinion. But as long as you've got someone within a team who can function within that and then help everyone get along, you can understand then a broader set of ideas that you're constructing something from. So actually, in a way, definitely I saw that Lydia and Holger, it appeared the way they cut it, that they weren't getting along so well from a happy clappy point of view, but that also is going to make their design stronger because, as you say, Lydia just says, well, you can't do this and I can do this, so you need that difference, and that's where it was such a strong team. I mean, it was an interesting editorial choice that they put those two together, because both of them have been, they're both wearing two sheep badges. I don't know, was it a random selection? 50-50 if it was random that they would have been together?
Yeah, it was an interesting team, and maybe they were looking to create a bit more drama and a bit more tension between two really strong characters with clear ideas. But actually, they both used it to their advantage, because they both recognized that they needed to do enough to wow the judges, create something really great, and that in their little interview sections, they were both a little bit more like, no, we're here to win now. We're here to do whatever we need to do. I'm paraphrasing, but the general sentiment was that, they needed to kind of push forward with things. And yeah, we saw that. It's funny when you say about the team working and the dynamics and the broadening the diversity, because I'm instinctively very much for welcoming work environments and encouraging people to be there. I'm totally behind that. I'm fully supportive of it. But I don't think I've ever quite thought about it in actually as practical terms, as if you have a comfortable, welcoming work environment or a study environment, whatever environment that is, it encourages people within that situation to share their ideas, share their perspectives, and then you get the benefits of having that diverse group of people working there. So if you had lots of different types of people working in a group, but then not everyone felt safe to contribute because it wasn't necessarily an environment that celebrated the different experience that they bring to that situation, then yeah, you're not necessarily going to have people coming forward with things. And more specifically, I thought actually about us doing this podcast together and actually the skill sets and experience that we both bring to it. And something that I've thought a lot about, but I don't know if I've really articulated it to you. I said it to friends, certainly. Like, there's no way that I would have decided, oh yeah, I'm going to do a podcast. Like, I wouldn't have felt like that was something I could do. But then because you came with your experience and the initial push to say, hey, I really want to, let's do this project together, then I was able to do that. And we both bring different skills to the environment. I don't think at the time we necessarily, either of us realized that I would be able to edit a podcast. That certainly wasn't on the cards, but we've brought different skills to it and a different dynamic.
So just to be clear what you're saying there, really between the lines, I've brought to the podcast my massive sense of entitlement to just do a podcast, and you're bringing all of your skills and knowledge over to it.
No, I was trying to make that a really nice thing, that actually we'd had some conversations about, I would really like to do this at some point, but I'm not sure that, I just don't know how to take the plunge to do it. And it was really wonderful and encouraging. Like, you could have asked anyone and he asked me to do it. And I was really grateful for that. And it's not that I have to be like grateful. Gosh, I'm trying to make this nice, okay? I'm trying to make this nice.
I'm pulling your leg, Georgia. But I agree. Like, I think what makes life interesting is points of difference, and otherwise everything becomes homogenous. That's why I knew that we would always have interesting discussions, because we do have different points of view. And obviously that I carry this enormous sense of entitlement, which enables me to do a podcast. It's all right. I'll let it go at some point, Georgia.
Never let that go. Never let that go, Adam. Especially when you can allow others to ride on your coattails. Okay. Well, the teams in Isaac and Ailsa's group, early on, they talked about doing a kind of a corset back. Instinctively, I was thinking, jumper, yarn, stretchy, corset? Is that going to work? And actually, because the detail in Aran is so dense, I mean, you've talked about having knitted things inspired by Aran knitting and having gone through books and being very careful not to say, I've knitted an Aran jumper before. We've talked about that on previous episodes, not sure which one. And so I was wondering, I had a jumper that was kind of, I don't know if it was strictly an Aran jumper, but it is certainly that kind of ilk. And I got it from a vintage shop when I was like 10, 11, 12. And it came up somewhere recently, like my mum found it in the attic. And actually the fabric is so dense that it didn't have that much give in it. And so I wondered if you could talk to that a little bit, because I don't have necessarily an experience of knitting that. Yeah, I wondered what was going on there with the give and the density of the fabric that allowed them to actually make something that was fitted.
Yes, Aran jumpers are definitely, they're on the stiffer side of knitted fabrics, partly because they are knitted to be worn outdoors as fishermen's jumpers. That's the heritage of them. They are made with a thicker wool on needles that aren't necessarily the ones you'd be recommended to. They're at the bottom end of the range. And so you end up with the stiffer, tighter fabric that's not going to let the wind through. So that, on the one hand, yes, that gives a more dense, it certainly eats a lot of yarn when you're making something. If you might think about 6 balls of yarn for a regular jumper, you'd be using 8 balls if it was a Aran design, because it pulls more of it in. But also, if it's a true charity shop Aran jumper, maybe it's been worn for a decade, so maybe it's just been stretched and stretched and stretched, and it's got no give left in it. But yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I find that absolutely fascinating, the function of different knitted clothing in different areas of the world. It was one of the amazing things that when I went to Iceland and I was talking to people there about knitting. So in Iceland, how they use wool in different ways to make a jumper appropriate for the person that's going to receive it and where they're going to use it. And basically you use the same design of jumper, but depending on whether someone's going to use the jumper more indoors or, outdoors during the summer, whether they're going to sit outdoors or whether they're going to work outdoors, the level of exertion they're going to go to depends on the number of strands that you knit with. And you go up to 8 strands of lopi, the Icelandic wool, in order to make a jumper really, really thick and hardy and will keep you warm if you're outside in an Icelandic winter, Whereas if someone is just going to use it more for springtime and they're going to be walking in it, you'll use 2 strands. And so they vary, 2, 4, 6, 8 strands, depending on the on how someone's going to use it. Yeah, so you get this really interesting difference in the fabric, how the fabric wears, and the material property of it, obviously how well it insulates. But yeah, going back to the point, I love that corseted little design on the back of that dress. I thought that was really beautifully done. And what Isaac also did is he'd unwound another jumper, something I've seen lots of people do, to get a different colour of yarn that he could then use to pick out details, to do the edging in. And I thought that worked beautifully.
It was a nice little homage as well to people who actually thrift jumpers and unwind them. I've got a friend who does that a lot, where she'll go around a charity shop, or she'll find something secondhand where actually if you unwind that whole jumper, you can get a jumper's worth of yarn, often much cheaper than if you'd buy the yarn straight away. And although that's like secondhand, actually, if you get a really nice jumper, I know my friend found one recently. It was from Toast. Expensive, pricey jumpers. I mean, part of the reason I probably even learnt to knit was because I didn't want to pay that much money for a jumper. So she got this gorgeous, gorgeous yarn, and I think it maybe had a few moth holes in it or something like that, a bit of wear and tear, so someone had given it away to a charity shop. Little did they know that, in fact, if you buy something from Toast, you can, in fact, take it back to them for free mending for the life of the garment. Didn't check the small print. Yeah. That's a whole. We could go into that can of worms. It's really interesting. They employ lenders and, or at least one person,
cool.
and so so you take anything back to a shop, and you don't even have to have proof of purchase. It's just that it's a Toast item. So I've got some things that I bought in charity shops that weren't for full price, and you can take them back to Toast, and they can repair them for you, and then they'll send it you back. And there's quite a long wait, I think, now with it, but
I'm not surprised, because that's a pretty amazing service, and it's wonderful that someone did it. But yeah, there's a fantastic video about this sort of documentary YouTube about this guy in the States. I think he's in the West Coast somewhere, but he's a retired guy, loves knitting, prolific quantities of hats produced, and the way he gets all the yarn for it is goes to charity shops and just carefully looks through jumper after jumper, looking for the right shape of construction where you're going to get continuous thread of yarn, and then is looking for cashmere, and he tends to find a jumper's worth of cashmere for $10, $20, whatever. That's what he's looking for. Amazing.
Yeah, I'd need to track it down. But a couple of years ago, I remember seeing a call for like a PhD, where they were a university was looking for somebody to research. This is my understanding from memory, that they were looking for somebody to look at finding jumpers secondhand, or how you could reuse yarn that was already knitted into things, because that has really quite large potential impact when you think about the sustainability of garments and reuse, that rather than a fabric, like a woven fabric, where you have to cut into something and then each time you kind of have more remnants, or you need to rework something again and again and again, that actually with yarn, you can knit it into whatever shape kind of situation that you want, and then unwind and redo it. And so if we understood more about what's going on and how you could do that on an industrial scale, how you could do that on a small scale, you could scale that up and it have really big impact. So it's important that we know more about these things. And then funnily, it wasn't the same person, but someone in comments recently said that they were studying a similar thing or doing some research on exactly that. And my closing thought on this little side tangent, is that actually people don't often realize that knitting something or knitted fabric, I'm not talking about the environmental impact of the yarn itself or the yarn making, but in terms of the use of a material, knitting something is one of the most efficient ways to use a material. It's not necessarily considering the environmental impact of the manufacturing of the yarn or the making of the yarn, whatever else, but in terms of waste, if you think about it, a jumper or a top, a dress, a hat, whatever, if you knit that out of something that is one continuous piece of thread or one continuous string, yarn, whatever you want to call it, that is manipulated and knitted into a fabric, and then that whole thing is in use, you have really low waste from that. So it's really interesting. I was at a conference last year where lots of people were looking at this principle around machine knitting and knitting in industry, because there are ways that the textile industry and the fashion industry could actually move more towards knitting things and utilizing technologies that we have within machine knitting and industrial knitting. And that could have a huge impact environmentally because you're not getting as much waste on if you cut something out and then sew it. I mean, this is in theory connected to the overall challenge because it was about using remnants and scraps and stuff and reusing yarn.
Also, what you've just said, Georgia, a really important point is that sewing is, I think what you just said was sewing is pure evil and no one should ever do it. And so I wholeheartedly agree with you. The planet is doomed because people are sewing rather than knitting. I completely agree. And where did we get onto this, like, obsession with sewing?
We should ask Holger.
We should. The great tailor, expert extraordinaire in all the fibre arts.
So somebody, I don't know if you saw this comment, somebody said about our conversation last week around Holger's professionalism. There were lots of people who said, yeah, absolutely, Holger's coming at it with a different level of skill and experience, and that's not really fair. But we love Holger and, you know, fair enough. Pros and cons of that. But somebody commented, and I'm afraid I don't know who it is, but somebody did say, I think on YouTube, they were emphasizing that tailoring was completely different to sewing, and sewing and tailoring were completely different to knitting, in the same way that knitting and crochet were totally different things. And they were saying, kind of to us, I think, directed. I don't think it was a derogatory comment, but that we were talking a lot about the importance of recognizing that knitting and crochet are different things, and that if we were to similarly equate being a tailor or sewing to knitting and saying, oh, they're all textiles, it's all experience. And while granted, yeah, absolutely, they are individual skills, I kind of have a different feeling on that, because I think that what we're seeing in this challenge, all the way back to the sofa challenge, is that there are transferable skills, especially for a tailor. The person had said there's a difference between tailoring and sewing, and absolutely very true. But looking at that, like, tailoring is so much about understanding how pieces of a garment fit together and how shapes work and the construction of that and what you need to do to connect things. Yeah, so in that sense, Holger does really have a leg up, because on a professional level, he deals with fitting materials and fibers and textures together to construct a shape of something. And I remember when I started knitting, I had done sewing when I was growing up, and I had done made some basic clothes and bits and bobs. And actually, I came into knitting with that understanding, and I quite quickly went on to making jumpers, tops, whatever, because I already knew how the construction would kind of come together. So it made sense to me when I was looking at, like, oh yeah, increases, decreases, or neckline, or, you know, if I was looking at how a jumper was going to sit, it was making sense to me. So I don't know, I don't want to be mean or push back on any of our listeners too much, but I think there's more transferable skills here than we're necessarily recognizing.
So we're going to have a little ad break. We're talking to some people about who is going to sponsor this podcast. Georgia, you wanted to say something. You wanted to call out someone particular that you wanted to mention.
We've done this first chunk of the podcast. It's been very Game of All focused, and that in itself is kind of a thing. It's a brand. It's a, you know, whatever it is. There's a lot of different content and things that we end up talking about where we don't necessarily get to shape episodes around things that might directly interest you guys as listeners or us as individuals. One of the pieces of feedback that we've had is that our podcast isn't about, okay, what are we working on, going through, like, this is the progress I've made this week since last week's episode. But I kind of wanted to take this opportunity to shout out to a pattern that I am really, 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 really loving. And I'm not just in love with it from the perspective of, like, oh, it's a lovely thing to knit, kind of on all levels. And especially as somebody who really values clearly laid out and well-structured instructions, I'm kind of in love with it. I'm dyslexic. It's really hard for me to read patterns when they're not very clear. And this has just been one of the best patterns I've ever really kind of come into contact with, to be honest. It's been doing the rounds a little bit. It's the Chapter Shawl by Lily Kate Makes, or Lily Kate Friends. And it's not like it wasn't sent to me. It's not any, I'm new to all this. No one sent me anything. It's not that. But I just love it. I don't even know Lily Kate. I don't know if you do or if you've ever met her, but I started knitting this pattern. It's lots of slip stitches and that kind of thing, lots of different colours. It's so enjoyable and clearly laid out and just cozy and nice, and I love it. I just wanted to say that. That's our sponsorship, not sponsorship for the day, is me saying how much I love this pattern.
Hashtag not an ad.
Yeah, hashtag not an ad, but in the place of what would be there, I bloody love this pattern. And if you've been thinking about knitting it, please knit it because it's wonderful. Thank you.
Amazing.
All done.
Right, solo challenge, game of wool. Make a refashioned bag. So in this task, people had to make a bag and they had to choose the yarn, but the yarn was basically fabric. That they had to choose a fabric for the yarn and they had to make it themselves within the 10 hours that they were given. Well, that's another thing that's happened, is that all the tasks are now 10 hours, whereas to start with, some of them are 12 hours. I wonder whether people have got RSI or something like that and they've had to produce the timing. Who knows? Anyway, we haven't been given an explanation for that. Maybe, yeah. Realise that people can't knit continuously for 12 hours. Tom said that they were looking for unexpected materials. They could crochet or knit it. And there was a weight test at the end. Now, I had a problem with the weight test because they use 2 balls of yarn. And again, this is a TV show for people who aren't necessarily knitters. And so showing 2 balls of yarn and saying each one of these weighs a kilo is really confusing. Balls of yarn. Typically, you buy a ball of yarn, it's 100 grams. Sometimes they're 50 grams. Very occasionally, you get 150 gram balls, but balls of yarn are 100 grams. So showing these 2 balls of yarn, which were each a kilo, they filled it with lead weight in it.
It was like the weirdest product placement. Ah, yes, we're going to have some weight now for 2 kilograms. Here are 2 kilograms of yarn. And it looks like a 200 gram ball of yarn or something.
It just didn't work.
And then we just put them in the bag. I hadn't thought about people not being knitters and seeing that, honestly. So going on to the contestants, who should we start with? I've got Lydia first on my list. She made a really wonderful bag that was using a kind of a waxed cotton fabric. And I wasn't 100% clear if it was like waxed cotton in the sense that the cotton was waxed or that wax was used to create the design on it. Like, you might say like a batik kind of thing. It wasn't batik, but yeah, so it was this beautiful, beautiful fabric that was then cut up into strips. And the beautiful fabric, I've got a really gorgeous skirt. I bought it at like Spitalfields Market. So my familiarity with this like gorgeous kind of patterned West African print is from having this gorgeous skirt that I bought. But cotton, not a lot of stretch. That's the main thing I'm trying to get at, is that there's not a lot of stretch here. And so she was describing it being really hard to knit into, and also that she used a linen stitch, which I've not done before, but maybe you have. But it's basically, she was saying you have to work every row twice.
I knitted it once on a hat because I thought it was so beautiful. I used linen stitch and was making this kind of decorative chevron. It is so tiresome to knit because so the pattern is knit one, and then slip one with yarn in front, and then yarn to back, and you knit one again. So you're not only slipping every stitch, but it's almost like you're knit one, purl one, but then you're slipping one as well. And so every other stitch doesn't get worked, and you've got that movement of the yarn to the back and to the front for every stitch. So it is a very, very slow stitch to work through. And I made this hat of it, and I got so bored of it, I thought, yeah, that's enough. It'll block to shape. and then just went into the ribbing. And so the hat wasn't really quite long enough. As soon as she said that, I was like, oh, yeah, that's a tough one to do.
I did have a moment of remembrance for Isaac's when he talked about his handles. They very briefly mentioned that he was using hair curlers for the handles. And of course, Tracy, we had with the bumblebee wings. And I had my little vent at the time. I mean, do you call it a vent? I don't know. I had my little reaction to the bumblebee wings and the hair curlers. And I do feel that these were hair curlers that were thinner, and then actually they did kind of work. They weren't these great big thick things. So props to Isaac, because that was actually pretty good.
Isaac is the person I want to talk about most. So I felt so strongly that all of a sudden he was going to pull it out of the bag and be just the number one here, because the design for the lace was the pattern that they found that his grandmother was knitting or was trying to knit when she died. So bringing that back to life. Oh, I thought it was, sorry. But just bringing that material back to life and then using it in his bag. Again, part of the story of that is what knitters and crafters love so much. Just having the story behind all of those things. And I was so excited to see what he would produce. And then I felt just my heart sank when he just just didn't have time. And they were talking about him being 3 hours behind in a 10-hour challenge just because he'd spent so long cutting up the material. And what can you say?
When he started the challenge, he was cutting out his own yarn from these strips because you had to make the yarn inclusive of the 10 hours. And there was a comment that he made to the camera crew about, a good project starts with I don't know if he said workmanship or the putting in the work into the materials, something along those lines. He was kind of saying that it's really important to have these foundations. And that's obviously so true. But I really, in that moment, was seeing maybe a bit of myself as well, that sometimes I think in a very linear stepped way. And so I have to set things up. I could see myself completely falling into that, to be honest. That's what I'm trying to say. It was painful to watch because I related so much.
I'm the exact opposite to that, in that I do count the number of seconds or minutes that I'm taking to do a task. And then in my head, I'm always adding up how long the whole task is going to take, so that I feel like I know, from minute one, whether I'm going to be late on 10 hours of work. And that's very much how I work. Everyone's different about that. And I know that Isaac just doesn't keep track of time in that way. And that was something he talked about as well. And it was so sad that as well, cutting up material was then such a big part of that overall challenge for him. And it meant that he never got to the lace part. So one thing I'll say is, a lady who follows me, and she is one of the best knitters I know. She should be on this show and absolutely smashing it. Her Instagram handle is salate_makes_things. SALAITE_makes_things. MAKESTINGS. I want to make that really clear, because she also gave me the line, "This episode was tailor-made for Holger." So she is a left-handed knitter. Not only is she absolutely prolific in what she knits and what she's able to knit, the amount she knits, the quality of things that she produces, she's an absolutely amazing knitter. But she also is left-handed knitter. I have no mechanism for understanding how difficult it is to learn to knit left-handed.
Correction incoming.
In the episode that we just recorded, George and I got a little bit carried away, and in fact, I got particularly carried away talking about Isaac and him being a left-handed knitter. He's not a left-handed knitter. He's a left-handed crocheter and a right-handed knitter. Now, think of that what you may, and that probably makes the discussion that we have even more interesting. But in the episodes on Game of Wool, Isaac is knitting as a right-handed person would, but he crochets as a left-handed crocheter. So he is a lefty. That will all make a lot more sense. And I'm sorry that we made the mistake in the recording. We can't go back and re-record it. But this, hopefully, little error check acknowledges the mistake we made, and it will make sense when you listen to the rest of the episode. Isaac is a left-handed knitter. And there is your surprise face, because it's such a huge thing to overcome, to learn to knit left-handed. Because if you're not a knitter, so this doesn't make sense to you, patterns are written in such a way for right-handed knitters. It isn't as simple as you can swap a right needle and a left needle and you just knit the other way. Because when you get into learning a pattern or something like that, everything is written as though you are a right-handed knitter, and there basically aren't left-handed patterns. I mean, you could say there are some and all the rest of it. But if you look out of the 3 million patterns on Ravelry that exist, 1.5 are for knitters, you'll find 10 that are for left-handed knitters. It isn't a thing. And it is a big deal to persevere. Most left-handed people will knit right-handed because it is such a struggle. In the same way that school children used to be forced to knit with you. Used to be forced to write with your right hand, regardless of whether you're left-handed or right-handed. There isn't really an easy mechanism to learn to knit left-handed. And so a lot of people end up knitting right-handed, even though they're lefties. And Isaac hasn't done that. And I think that's something which was worth celebrating or talking about or showing more of, because it's a really big deal. And how you deal with that, with designs, with patterns, all the rest of it. I wish we'd have seen more of that on the show, or anything of that on the show. So what my friend was mentioning to me as well, other than her tailor-made for Holger comment, she questioned, was he actually given proper left-handed scissors to be able to do that cutting? Was that a reason why his cutting took so long? Now, that's scandalous to think that, but I don't know. And I can't imagine that they didn't have left-handed scissors. But can you imagine?
That's slander. That's slanderous. Oh my goodness. I mean,
well, we don't know.
Very strong. We don't know. We have no idea. But like, I mean...
But you think about, like, on the one hand, knitting is very gendered. And most people imagine when they think about knitting, they think about women knitting. It is very ageist. But most people think about older people knitting. When you think about knitting, it is almost exclusively done right-handed. It is a massive barrier to break down about right-handed versus left-handed knitting. And really, sadly, like, it wasn't picked up on in the show. And I find it fascinating. But there's, again, I say it's one of those things that's really difficult for me to engage with because I'm just a righty. And so I've never had to be conscious of it. Now, sorry, Georgia, I've just talked and watched your face explode with emotion.
So many feelings right now. So many. I know a lot of left-hand knitters, they will sometimes learn to knit continentally because you're having to hold the yarn with your left hand and do a little bit more, but you're still kind of using your right hand to move the stitches and stuff. So I learned to continentally knit when I'd had a hand surgery on my right hand, and I couldn't use my right hand to do the English style, like pulling the yarn round and shoving the needle in. I kind of switched around, and I kind of had to have a little bit of a dive into doing more with my left hand. And it was really hard. I mean, I am right-handed, but I love knitting continentally. And so I know that that's sometimes a bit of a workaround that people use. I imagine the reason that they didn't even mention it or talk about it was because it was just like, we ain't got time for that. Like, to explain why it's not so easy to just make a switch of like, well, no, why don't you just knit left-handed? I think instinctively a lot of people would make an association, as you pointed out, between learning to write left-handed versus learning to write right-handed versus left-handed. I remember in school when we had Romans Day, of course, but we also had Victorians Day. And I remember a big thing that we were taught around the Victorians in Britain was that you couldn't possibly write with your left hand, and that you had to have your hand tied behind your back. And I feel like one of the things that they did on Victorians Day was like all the lefties like couldn't use their hand; they had to write right-handed for a little bit, so we could all learn that this is what used to happen. But I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but maybe it was sort of an early primary school introduction to like how society has progressed. Now you can write with your left hand. And I wonder if people would just look at it, and especially in Britain, because it's something that you will learn about in school, I wonder if people would just equate it to writing, and there would be too much of an oversimplification where they would think, well, that's silly. Why can't you just knit with your left hand? Like, why can't you just do that? Like, what's the problem? And yeah, absolutely, they could explain why. But on some level, maybe that was going to put people off. Or maybe they just couldn't be with figuring out how to explain that, because it's weird, it's tricky. On one level, when I think about left-handed knitting, I think, oh, no, it's fine. You just follow you've got the needle. Oh, wait, no. And then it doesn't quite land.
That's such a righty mentality, Georgia, that you're being so rightist.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a segue on whether or not he had the right scissors to be able to cut the fabric in the right way. I will probably never know. I went through the full roller coaster with Isaac because I was all of a sudden full of hope that he was going to really have this incredible knit. I wasn't that sure about his core bag, but when it had the humbug sort of ends to it, the sweet, it was knitted in the design of a humbug sweet. But with that lace coming out at the end of it, I just thought that was going to be the most amazing thing. And then sadly, It was nowhere near finished. It didn't have any of the lace. It didn't have a zip. It didn't have a closure. I'm not sure all of the ends were woven in. It was a bit sad.
I think sometimes when people struggle with time, the assumption is like that people didn't add it up, they didn't figure it out, and they weren't prepared. And if only they'd just broken it down into these different sections, kind of like you were saying earlier, like you'll be thinking 10 hours ahead and then figuring out that you know that you're going to be 1 minute late or 1 minute early or something because you've added all the times up. Like, speaking as a person who really struggles with timing, right, and tasks, I absolutely do that. Almost to a fault, because I'm so wanting it to go right. I so want to deliver. But in actually figuring out how long things take, I could add it all up and it makes sense. Like, it's added up to 10 hours. Like, I know that, okay, it's going to take me this long to do this thing, this long to do this thing. But if the fundamental assessments of the timings that you're basing that on are just wrong because you can't perceive how long that's going to take you, then you're scuppered. I watched a lot of Real Housewives, and there's one of the Real Housewives of Miami. She was always late to everything, right? There was some big row about like, you're late to everything, and we had to hold the private plane for you, and we're never doing that again, and this is the final time. And so she was really upset by that conversation. But she went away, and for the first time in her life, she was like, yeah, so I didn't actually know how long it took me to get ready to leave the house to go out to an event. And I timed it. And like had all my makeup artists there, my hairdresser and everything. And it took me 3 hours. So now I know that it takes me 3 hours. And before I thought it took me an hour. And so that's why I was always late. And she's like in her 40s. And I was like, you are my kindred spirit. Like, you absolutely, like, I didn't know how long it took me to get ready in the morning. I thought it took me 20 minutes. It doesn't. It takes me an hour. And so I'm always off by like 40 minutes. And so having to like reprogram everything in my life to figure these things out in a situation like with Isaac, if you are a person who struggles with that kind of timing and you're in a new experience where it's a new task every week and you're trying to figure it out every week, it's really hard for me to break down that stuff. It's like with editing the podcast. I did not envisage that there were going to be these various different roadblocks. And I really feel for Isaac, because if I was having to do a new challenge every week like that and plan all my timings and figure it all out, it would be incredibly difficult for me, like incredibly difficult. So props to him for coming up with this idea. And I'm really sad that we didn't get to see it completed, you know? Because it looked amazing. The idea was great.
I haven't checked, but maybe he's remade it on Instagram. I'd really, really love to see if he has made it, because I really just wanted to see it finished. It was such a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
There we go.
Humbug.
Bar humbug. Holger's bag was really impressive. To me, the first thing I thought of, I know they talked about it looking like a scallop in the end, but I thought it looked more like a nautilus, kind of stripy, elongating stripiness. It was a lovely bag, and he crocheted a button on for Di, the judge.
Charming him with his crocheted buttons.
Exactly.
Concept-wise, I found it funny that he was like, I don't go to festivals, but I'm making a festival-inspired saddle bag. You know, it was very good for that concept, and absolutely being able to deliver something that's not just, 17th century, 18th century Italian theatre dog costume. It felt like it wasn't very Holger in a weird way, but then because it was made so well, it was Holger, if you know what I mean. Then we had Ailsa, who, inspired by a World War II pattern of making these little slippers out of old tights, used her gym leggings. And there's a lovely thing she said at first. If gym leggings can hold someone when they're doing squats, they can definitely hold some shopping. And I thought it was a cute phrase, but also I was like, but they don't exactly hold you, they just stretch. So I was a little bit worried about that to start with. But because she'd chosen to crochet, she described needing to take some of the tension as she's going, so that she kind of was crocheting away the elasticity. And yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, I don't crochet, but I thought you're holding a lot of tension in your hands to do that. That did not feel nice.
So I understood where she was going with that, but I also had my, heart in mouth moment, because it was that's a challenging thing to do consistently for hours and hours and hours. And ultimately what we saw was the shaping of it didn't look as exact as some of what she'd done. But I really don't know, without ever having tried to knit with that fabric, I don't know myself how much that's down to just the fabric itself, and how much it's a tension thing. Being able to talk about and manipulate your own tension should be something to be celebrated, because it's a real skill. It takes a lot of confidence to be able to do that. And I feel like Elsa's got lost in this episode. She's such an amazing knitter. She's so talented. It made me think about pre-stressed reinforced concrete beams. If you're making a skyscraper, you pre-stress some elements sometimes, some parts of the structure, in order that they're already under tension or under compression before they go into the structure, so that when the structure then sits on them, or when they're using the structure, they've got extra elasticity, or they're already pre-compressed, so they're ready to work harder at the point you need them to work. For me, it was a familiar concept of like pre-stressing something. I definitely understood where she was going with that.
Someone in the comments as well had said that when we talked about linen last week, they didn't understand why more people didn't pre-soak their linen yarn to soften it before knitting with it. And I don't know if you saw that comment, but they were saying that so many people struggle with linen yarn and then block it, but actually you do release a lot of tension in the yarn if you if you soak it and dry it as a hank before it's knitted up into something. I wonder if that is sort of related in a similar way, that actually there's a way that you can like pre-stress something. I mean, my dad paints, and the whole stretching your canvas is is a really important thing.
I thought the judging this week was quite challenging to watch. I mean, for the group challenge, because they started being so complimentary about Elsa's and Isaac's the dress that they made, and then all of a sudden they just turned on them and said like, this is wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong and I don't like that and I don't like that and how you did that's wrong. Where did that come from?
We were led into a false security that actually it was closer than it was. And then,
maybe that's what they were doing.
At the last minute, they were just kind of like, yes, well, we'd expect to see better finishing at this stage in the competition. But the finishing I think they were referring to were those big stitches that attached the they called it the wings, like Elsa's kind of Tinkerbell skirt idea. And they attached that with statement stitches in an opposing yarn. It wasn't a cream yarn to go alongside with the cream jumper. It was a statement purple that matched the collar.
Yeah.
And I really thought that was a deliberate design choice. It wasn't like, oh, these aren't good stitches. But the way that it was edited, or the way that the judges communicated it came across to me that they were trying to say that these stitches were not intentional in some way, and that was their criticism. And some people in our comments last week said sometimes they felt that the judging was a little bit too preference and taste based, that it was a little bit more angled towards the judges' personal preferences and their sort of desires for a garment over necessarily objective judgments. I think the example that they were talking about in the comments was actually for Isaac, the daisy chain necklace, that they said that was entirely an appropriate project for Isaac's age, for that demographic. That is something that would be a statement piece of jewelry for that generation. But for two women who are in a very different kind of generation, very different taste, and you can kind of see it almost in the clothes that they themselves wear, that wasn't really to their liking, so they didn't really necessarily acknowledge how that was fitting for that generation. I had a similar conversation around the texture in the sweater with the smiley face and stuff, about that being a really popular motif with his generation, and that actually in that sense the judging had been unfair to Isaac sometimes because there was a kind of a generational difference. It's reminded me of this thing that I heard a composer, really famous composer, Steve Reich, say when I saw him speak years and years ago. He said, don't you let your taste influence your judgment of quality. And he was talking about that in relation to music and composing, that actually someone could write a piece of really great music, but you don't like it because of your preferences. And you've got to be really careful to make sure, especially when you go on to teach or just on in your career, that you respect different people's work separately from your own individual preferences. So, I was thinking about that a little bit.
There are so many difficulties that people have with this show, and a lot of them are based with the judging. And I think one of the difficulties that the show has had in communicating is the criteria for judging. It's not clear that all contestants are judged on an equal basis with equal criteria, even within the same task. Now, it may well have been done, and it's just that the editing is bad, but one of those things does a disservice. I think the reason that people are emotional about this show and that people are upset about it is that they care so much about the contestants and the, as fibre artists going into this, that they want to see succeed and do well, and that then to be put in a situation where we're not sure about the way in which they're being judged, we're not sure whether the tasks are fair and all those other things. That's why people can then get very upset about it, because they care about the people involved, and they care about the, Elsa and Isaac and Holger, Lydia, and all of the other contestants that have been through the process. Everyone wants to see them do well and be treated fairly, and we're not reassured that that's the way in which it's being done. And that's really difficult to stomach as an audience, because we're asked to be invested in the show, and at the same time we're being asked to trust this whole process, but we're not being given clarity about that process. And so where does that trust come from? That's what's created some emotion. And that's probably the difficult emotion to then bridge into, like, do we actually like the show as a whole, where we feel like people that we want to recognize and we want to share identity with and we want to feel that we're part of. Can we stomach that where we don't see actually a totally transparent process they're going through?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, very early on, I was starting to feel like, you know, we're making all of these, you could say, complaints about the show. And one of the obvious things to respond with that is like, well, just stop watching it then. Like, why do you need to keep responding to it? But I don't necessarily agree with that stance, because I'm so passionate about knitting and craft that when this show came on the scene, or we knew that it was going to happen, it was like a dream come true. I think maybe I'd said early on, like, I felt like I'd been manifesting it. Like I'd hoped and wished that there could be some kind of like knitting version of Bake Off, and wouldn't that be wonderful? And I'd love to be able to sit there with my knitting and watch it and talk about it with my friends, and that would be amazing. Because it, you know, it's so rare that I see the thing that I love most in like my free time, or like, you know, yeah, I'm going to say knitting is one of the things I love most in the world. And the idea that I got to see that on television, primetime television, it was amazing. Then when we kind of feel like, you know, straight from week one, where there was all this stuff with Shetland, like, it felt uneasy. Like, we lost a lot of trust in that one, like from the knitting community. Something that we had a conversation about very early on, where I said, people might say, why you bother watching it? I want to watch it not necessarily in support of like the production or the editors or whatever, but in support of the contestants. Like, I want to watch it because I want to see what they make out of this experience. And I want to get to know them in whatever we can glean from the stuff that's shared. And yeah, I want to trust the expert status of Di and Sheila, in the sense that I believe that it's down to poor editing rather than their input, and that maybe people who are editing it aren't necessarily sure or certain of what is important to put there or what's not, and what's subtly scathing. Look at your video about how to like diss a knitter without really dissing them. Like, weird things that you can say that cut you to the heart, cut you to the core. But to the average audience, they're not going to necessarily know that. Maybe there's some element of that, like we're reading into it more as knitters. But yeah, I feel so invested because I wanted it to be my dream show, because it was my dream show. And when it's not necessarily met up to those high expectations, that's my fault for having such lofty hopes. You know, last week when you said, oh, I don't think there's going to be a season 2, that kind of broke my heart a bit, because I thought, but I want to see them get it right.
I really, really, really wanted to love the show so much. And I felt like, you know, the first couple of episodes, there was a huge amount of negativity online. And I was trying to stand against that and put forwards a positive spin. That was interesting for me, because they then got into a conversation with the team at Game of Wool, and they were then asking me to produce content with them, which I was really excited about. But again, that was a huge loss of trust moment for me. And so I don't have a lot of spare time in my life, and they wanted to do something with me which would take out 3 days for me in a really, really tight period. And I held that for them because they wanted to do a really exciting piece of content, which was worth doing from both of our points of view. And they didn't get back to me and didn't get back to me and didn't get back to me. And then when they finally did, they said, oh, actually, no, we've changed our mind. We don't want to do it. I was like, okay, that's it. And I felt I lost trust in the production team at that point, because that was something I know that is a very childish and, you know, immature thing to do, but it's my feelings. Like, I feel like they let me down. I was holding like the most valuable resource I have, which is time, for them. And then they just like, no, I'm not going to do it. For information for you and listeners, I suppose, behind the scenes, that's another thing that has gone on, which I suppose detracts from my level of faith in the show, because I don't feel like that was something that was done in good faith.
Yeah.
But there we go.
No, I get that. I got a bit emotional before when we were talking about like trust, when you were reflecting back that like you wanted to love it. Like you really genuinely wanted to love it. And I know that because we've been talking about this since it was maybe even announced. The thing that we do get from this, and the part of it that I do love, is absolutely getting to know these contestants, and to an extent as well getting to know Di and Sheila. That's the part I really love, is actually having knitters, like real actual knitters on television. Like that's like it's like a dream. It's a dream, you know? So remind me, are you back next week?
No, we're going to do this again.
Oh God. Okay.
But I'm going to be somewhere different. I'm going to be away, but I'll be somewhere different, and hopefully I'll be with a faster connection.
Fingers crossed.
Next week is the final. It's the last time we'll be discussing Game of Wool. I mean, with the intention on our clearly written agenda of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to do a shout out. Do you know what? I did a full Georgia last night. I did a full Georgia. After I watched the episode, I was like, do you know what? It's Aran jumpers. I love Aran jumpers so much. So I went into my deep dive. I refreshed all of my knowledge on Aran jumpers in case that was going to be where this conversation went.
I love that doing a Georgia is like academic deep dive. Like that's a dream.
If anyone was, like me, just utterly curious about Aran knitting, there was one book that I wanted to just tell people to go to, which is Alice Starmore's Aran Knitting. Alice Starmore has written a magnificent... The beginning of the book has history of Aran knitting, examples of Aran knitting, and then she goes on to basically how you design an Aran jumper, and then she has her designs in there, some designs of Aran jumpers. It is such a beautiful book, well worth it. If you like me wanted to go and do a Georgia on Aran knitting, then that's the place to go and do it. But otherwise, it's next week. We weren't actually told what the final tasks were going to be. We saw some mannequins. We saw hats. Like, hat is a staple of knitting, so I'm excited that we're going to see a hat being knitted. Is that it for this week from the Yarn Library podcast?
I mean, hopefully. Fingers crossed it is, because who knows when we end this recording. I don't know what's going to be there. I've had like a vague outline of your face for most of this conversation. So.
Oh, really?
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Well, thank you very much for listening to Yarn Library podcast with me, Adam Cleveley, and you, Georgia Denham, at Tulip Pearl on Instagram.
Georgia Denham. Tulip Pearl on Instagram. That's me in my lovely new jumper. Yes, well, have an amazing week. Ta-da!
Ta-da! There we go. Cheerio.
You've been listening to Yarn Library podcast with Adam Cleveley at Cleveley Knits and me, Georgia Denham at Tulip Pearl. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share and subscribe. And if you didn't,